He was never supposed to fall for me. I kept repeating that to myself like it would keep things simple, like it would keep me safe from whatever this was turning into. I was just there to help him get through something ugly, something that had already broken him before I ever stepped in. When I first saw him after the breakup, he didn't look like the same person people used to talk about. There was no energy in him, no sharpness, no sense of direction. He sat there staring at nothing most of the time, like he was replaying something in his head that he couldn't turn off. Everyone else noticed it too, but no one really knew what to say to him anymore. After a while, people stopped trying. I didn't. At first, it was nothing serious. Just a message to check if he was okay. He took hours to reply, and when he did, it was short, distant, like he didn't want to be pulled into a conversation. But I didn't push. I kept it light, simple, just enough to remind him that someone was there without making it feel like pressure. A few days later, he replied faster. Then he started asking small things back. It wasn't much, but it was something. That's how it began, quietly, almost invisibly. He told me about her eventually. Not all at once. It came in pieces, like he was testing how much he could say without breaking completely. He told me how long they were together, how serious it was, how he thought she was the one. The way he talked about her made it obvious he hadn't let go, not even close. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was confusion, regret, and something deeper, like he didn't understand how everything could end so suddenly. Some nights, he couldn't sleep. That's when the messages would come. Long paragraphs about memories he couldn't forget, things he wished he had done differently, questions he knew no one could answer. I didn't try to fix anything. I just listened. Sometimes that's all people need, and I think that's why he kept coming back to me. It became a routine before I even realized it. He would text me first thing in the morning, even if it was just a hey. At night, he wouldn't sleep without talking to me for a while. In between, there were random messages, things that reminded him of something, or nothing at all. It didn't feel forced. It felt natural, like we had always been talking like this. Slowly, he started changing. Not completely, but enough to notice. He laughed a little more. His replies weren't as heavy. He didn't mention her in every conversation anymore. There were moments where he sounded like himself again, and I knew I had something to do with that. That's when it started getting complicated. I told myself I was just being a good friend. That anyone in my position would have done the same thing. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple anymore. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way I waited for his messages. The way my mood shifted depending on how he sounded. The way I remembered little details about him without even trying. He started depending on me more too. If something went wrong in his day, I was the first person he told. If something made him smile, he shared it with me. It wasn't just about his pain anymore. I had become part of his normal. One night, he said something that stayed with me longer than it should have. He told me he didn't know what he would have done without me these past few weeks. It was simple, but the way he said it made it feel heavier. Real. I didn't know how to respond to that. Part of me felt warm, like I mattered in a way I hadn't expected. Another part of me felt uneasy, like I was stepping into something I shouldn't. I ignored the second part. Instead, I kept showing up. I stayed available, always ready to listen, always ready to reply. I told myself it was because he needed someone, but the truth was, I had started needing it too. There were moments where the conversations got quieter, where neither of us said much, but neither of us left either. Just being there felt enough. Those were the moments that confused me the most. It didn't feel like helping anymore. It felt like something else, something I didn't want to name yet. I started catching myself wondering things I shouldn't have been wondering. What if I had known him before her? What if things were different? What if this wasn't just temporary? Every time those thoughts came up, I pushed them away. They didn't make sense. He was still healing. I was just part of that process. That's all this was supposed to be, but the lines didn't feel as clear anymore. He wasn't just talking to me because he was hurting. And I wasn't just listening because I felt bad for him. Somewhere between those late-night conversations and quiet pauses, something had shifted. I just didn't know exactly when it happened. And maybe that was the problem, because while I was busy helping him move on from someone else, I didn't realize I was slowly becoming the person he turned to for everything. Not just his pain, but his comfort, his distraction, his peace. And without meaning to, I stopped being just someone who was helping. I became someone he needed. It didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a single moment where everything changed. It was quieter than that, slower, almost unnoticeable if you weren't paying attention. But I was. And I could feel it shifting every day. He stopped sounding like someone who was trying to survive a breakup. He started sounding like someone who was learning how to live again. And somehow, I was always there in the middle of it. Our conversations weren't just late-night comfort anymore. They became a part of our routine, something expected. He'd message me as soon as he woke up, sometimes before anyone else. It wasn't deep or emotional every time. Sometimes it was random, pointless, even stupid. But that's what made it feel real. It wasn't forced. It wasn't about healing anymore. It was just us. He laughed more. Not the kind of laugh people fake to move on, but the kind that comes naturally, without effort. And every time it happened, I knew I had something to do with it. That thought stayed with me longer than it should have. He didn't talk about her much anymore. When he did, it felt distant, like he was describing something that didn't belong to him the same way it used to. There was no intensity left in it. No attachment in his voice. At least, that's what I told myself. Instead, he talked about his day. About small things that didn't matter to anyone else but somehow mattered to me. Things he noticed, things he thought about, things that reminded him of something funny. And every time, he chose to tell me first. That's when I realized something I couldn't ignore. I had become the first person he thought of. It should have felt normal. Friends do that, right? They share things, they talk, they stay connected. But this didn't feel like just friendship anymore. There was something else underneath it, something unspoken but obvious. One night, he said it without even realizing how much it would affect me. He told me, "I don't think I'd be okay right now if you weren't here." I didn't respond immediately. I just stared at the message, reading it over and over like it would mean something different the next time. It didn't. It meant exactly what it sounded like, and it changed everything. I felt it in the way my chest tightened, in the way my thoughts started moving faster than they should have. It wasn't just about him needing someone anymore. It felt like he needed me. That kind of feeling is dangerous. It makes you forget where the line is. It makes you stop asking questions you probably should be asking. I told myself it still wasn't wrong. He was single. He wasn't with her anymore. Whatever this was, it wasn't hurting anyone. That's what I kept repeating every time the doubt tried to creep in. But deep down, I knew this wasn't as simple as I wanted it to be. There were moments where everything slowed down, where the conversations got softer, more personal. He'd tell me things he didn't tell anyone else. Not just about his past, but about himself. His fears, his insecurities, the things he usually kept hidden. And I listened. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Sometimes there would be silence between us, but it never felt empty. It felt full, like there was something sitting there that neither of us was ready to say out loud. Those were the moments that stayed with me the most. I started noticing the way he said my name. The way his tone changed when it was just us talking. The way he stayed a little longer in conversations even when there was nothing left to say. It wasn't obvious enough to call it something real, but it wasn't nothing either. There was one night where it almost crossed the line completely. We were talking like usual, nothing special at first. Then the conversation slowed down. The kind of quiet that feels heavier than words. He said something about how things felt different with me. Not better or worse, just different. I asked him what he meant, but he didn't answer right away. When he finally did, it was vague, like he didn't trust himself to say too much, but I understood anyway. I felt it too. For a second, I thought he was going to say something more. Something clear. Something that would force both of us to admit what was happening. But he didn't. And I didn't push him to. Maybe I was scared of what that would mean. Instead, we stayed in that space where nothing was defined but everything was felt. It was easier that way. No labels, no expectations, no responsibility for what this could turn into. I convinced myself that it was fine. That we were just close. That not everything needed a name, but the truth was, I had already crossed a line in my head. I started thinking about him differently. Not just as someone I cared about, but as someone I wanted. Not in a loud or obvious way, but in the quiet moments where my mind wandered without permission. I wondered what it would be like if things were different. If I had met him before everything fell apart. If I wasn't just the person who helped him pick up the pieces. Those thoughts didn't feel wrong at the time. They felt natural, like a continuation of everything we had already built. That's how I justified it, but there was something I couldn't ignore, no matter how much I tried to keep things simple. This didn't start as something real. It started as him being broken and me being there to fix it. And somewhere along the way, the roles got blurred because even if he wasn't with her anymore, I wasn't completely innocent in this either. I wasn't just helping him move on. I was slowly becoming the reason he didn't look back. For a while, everything felt steady. Not perfect, not defined, but stable enough that I stopped questioning it. He was present, consistent, and in a way that mattered. He felt close. I didn't need labels anymore because his actions were enough to keep me there. That's what made the shift harder to notice at first. It started small. His replies got shorter. Not cold, just lighter, like something was missing behind them. The timing changed too. He didn't message first in the mornings anymore. Sometimes hours would pass before he responded, and when he did, it felt like he was somewhere else mentally. I told myself I was overthinking. People get busy. Not everything has meaning behind it. That's what I kept repeating, even when it didn't feel true. Then one day, he disappeared completely. No messages. No explanation. Nothing. I waited longer than I should have. Checked my phone more times than I want to admit. It didn't make sense. This wasn't like him. Not after everything we had built, not after how constant he had been. When he finally replied, it was late. Just one message. Casual. Like nothing had changed. I knew right then something had. I asked him where he had been. He hesitated. I could feel it even through the screen. The typing, stopping, typing again. And then he said it in a way that sounded almost careful. He told me he had talked to her. It didn't hit all at once. For a second, it just sat there, like my mind needed time to catch up with what he meant. Then everything started connecting too quickly. He said she reached out first. That it wasn't planned. That they just talked. Just talked sounded harmless, but it didn't feel harmless. Not after everything. I asked him why he didn't tell me earlier. He didn't really answer that. He just said he didn't think it was a big deal, but it was. I could feel the difference immediately. Not just in that moment, but in everything that followed. His attention shifted. Not completely, but enough to notice. The space between his messages grew. The tone changed again, this time more distant than before, and suddenly, I wasn't the first person he thought of anymore. I tried to stay calm about it. I didn't want to sound jealous or insecure. I didn't even know what right I had to feel that way. We never defined anything. There was no promise, no commitment. Just something unspoken that I had started believing in too much, but it kept happening. He mentioned her again a few days later. This time more casually, like it wasn't something he needed to be careful about anymore. He said they were trying to figure things out. That phrase stuck with me more than anything else. Figure what out? I wanted to ask, but I already knew the answer. He wasn't done with her. Maybe he never was. Everything I thought we had started feeling smaller, less certain. Like it only existed in the space where he was hurting, and now that he wasn't as broken anymore, he didn't need it the same way. Didn't need me the same way. I tried to hold on to what was left. I kept the conversations going, even when they felt one-sided. I responded quickly, even when he didn't. I told myself it was just a phase, that things would go back to how they were. They didn't point one night. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I asked him directly what was going on. Not in an aggressive way, just honest. I needed clarity, even if it wasn't what I wanted to hear. He didn't avoid it this time. He told me he was confused. That talking to her again brought back things he thought were gone. That he didn't know what to do with it. And then he said something that made everything else feel irrelevant. He said he still cared about her. Not in the past tense. Not as a memory. Present. I felt something drop inside me when I read that. Not dramatic, not loud. Just quiet and heavy, like something settling into place that I couldn't change. I asked him what that meant for us. There was a long pause before he answered. Longer than any pause we had ever had before. And when he finally did, it wasn't clear. It wasn't reassuring. It was the kind of answer that gives you nothing to hold on to. He said he didn't know what us was. That hurt more than anything else he could have said, because I knew what it was. Maybe not officially, maybe not out loud, but I knew what it felt like. And hearing him reduce it to something undefined made me realize how differently we had been seeing the same thing. I wasn't confused. I was just wrong. Everything started making sense in a way I didn't want it to. The late replies. The distance. The shift in tone. It wasn't random. It wasn't temporary. It was him pulling away, slowly, carefully, like he didn't want to admit it even to himself. I wasn't losing him suddenly. I had already lost him. I just didn't notice when it started. The hardest part wasn't that he was going back to her. It was realizing what I had been to him the entire time. Not something real, not something lasting. Just a space he stayed in while he was trying to fix what she broke. I wasn't the person he chose. I was the person he used to forget her. And now that he didn't need to forget anymore, I didn't fit into his world the same way. I asked him one last question. Even though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. I asked him if any of it was real. He replied quickly this time. Said it was. Said I mattered. Said he didn't regret any of it, but his words didn't match what he was doing, and that's when I understood something I should have seen from the beginning. You can matter to someone and still not be enough for them to stay. I spent so much time helping him heal that I didn't realize I was slowly breaking in the process. And in the end, I had nothing to show for it except the same kind of pain he started with. The only difference was, he had somewhere to go back to. I didn't.
After that conversation, I told myself it meant nothing. It was just a friendly exchange between two people who happened to cross paths. I had lived long enough to know how easily the mind can turn simple kindness into something more complicated. So I made a quiet promise to myself not to read too much into it, but the truth was that something had already shifted inside me. The next time I saw him, he greeted me with the same easy smile. It wasn't forced or overly familiar. It felt natural, as if continuing a conversation we had simply paused the day before. We spoke briefly at first, the way acquaintances do. A few polite questions, a few simple answers. Yet even those short exchanges carried a strange warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. Days passed, and our conversations slowly became longer. It never seemed planned. We would start with something ordinary, a small observation about the day, a casual comment about work or life. But somehow those conversations kept stretching further than expected. He had a way of asking questions that invited real answers rather than polite ones. That he asked about the places I had lived, the kind of work I used to do, the things I enjoyed before life became so routine. At first I responded carefully, giving short explanations without too much detail. But he listened in a way that made it easy to continue speaking. That I realized something strange after a while. No one had asked me these kinds of questions in years. Most of the people around me already assumed they knew my life story. Conversations with them rarely moved beyond familiar subjects. But with him, every topic seemed fresh. Even then I reminded myself how unusual the situation was. He was 27 years old, nearly 3 decades younger than me. The difference between our ages was impossible to ignore. If anything, that fact should have made our conversations awkward or uncomfortable. Instead, it had the opposite effect. The age gap seemed to remove certain expectations. He didn't treat me like someone fragile or outdated. He spoke to me as if my experiences were valuable, as if the years I had lived actually meant something. Still, I kept my distance emotionally. At least that's what I tried to do. One evening our conversation drifted into more personal territory. It happened gradually, without any clear moment where the subject changed. We were discussing life in general, the strange ways people grow older and realize their expectations didn't always match reality. That he asked if I was happy. The question caught me off guard because it was so simple. People rarely ask something that direct unless they already expect a complicated answer. For a moment I considered giving the usual response. The polite one people offer when they don't want to explain their real feelings. But something about the way he asked made that answer feel dishonest. So I hesitated before speaking. That I told him that life had been good in many ways. I had a long marriage, children who had grown into independent adults, and a life that most people would consider stable. Everything sounded respectable when described out loud, but then I admitted something I rarely said to anyone. Sometimes stability feels a lot like loneliness. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. I immediately felt embarrassed, as if I had revealed something too personal to someone who barely knew me. I expected the conversation to become uncomfortable after that. Instead, he simply listened. That he didn't interrupt or rush to offer advice. He just allowed the silence to exist for a moment before responding quietly. "You deserve to be seen," he said. Those 4 words lingered between us. They weren't dramatic or exaggerated. Yet they carried a kind of sincerity that made them difficult to dismiss. That night I thought about that sentence more than I wanted to admit. It replayed in my mind while I washed dishes, while I prepared for bed, while I lay awake in the quiet darkness next to my husband. The strange part wasn't that a younger man had said something kind. The strange part was how deeply those words affected me. Over the following weeks our interactions continued. I noticed myself looking forward to those moments more than I should have. They broke the predictable rhythm of my days. Conversations with him felt lighter, more alive, as if a door inside me had quietly opened again. Without realizing it, I began paying more attention to small things about myself. I chose clothes more carefully when leaving the house. I brushed my hair with a little more patience. These were small changes, almost embarrassing ones, but they made me aware of how long it had been since I felt noticed. At the same time, guilt began whispering in the background of my thoughts. Nothing inappropriate had happened between us. Our conversations were still just conversations. Yet part of me knew that emotional lines can blur long before physical ones appear. One afternoon we found ourselves talking again longer than expected. The subject didn't matter much anymore. The conversation flowed naturally, moving from one topic to another with surprising ease. As we prepared to leave, he hesitated for a moment. The pause was subtle but noticeable, then he spoke with a quiet honesty that made the air between us feel heavier. "I know this might sound strange," he said slowly, "but I really enjoy talking to you." His voice didn't carry the playful tone of casual flirting. It sounded sincere, almost cautious, as if he understood that the words might carry more meaning than they appeared to. For a second I didn't know how to respond. My instincts told me to laugh it off, to turn the moment into something harmless. But another part of me felt unexpectedly touched by the confession. So I simply smiled and thanked him. The conversation ended shortly after that, but the feeling it left behind followed me home. When I walked through the door that evening, my husband was sitting in his usual spot watching television. The glow of the screen reflected across the room while the familiar silence settled around us. He barely looked up when I entered. I stood there for a moment, observing the scene that had once felt so normal. The quiet house, the routine, the comfortable distance that had defined our lives for years, and for the first time a dangerous question formed in my mind. What if the attention I had just experienced wasn't something temporary? What if someone else could offer the connection I thought had disappeared from my life forever? That thought alone was enough to make my heart beat faster, and it scared me more than anything else.